Connor Blake had seen many things in his 32 years of life. He had served as a military medic on Earth, patching up soldiers in places most people only heard about on the news. He had watched men die and helped others survive against all odds. But nothing in his past had prepared him for life on Harmony Point. The orbital station floated in the darkness between stars, a place where humans and aliens tried to work together. The word "tried" was important because not everyone believed in cooperation. Some species looked at humans and saw partners. Others saw something else entirely. The Draketh were warriors. Their bodies stood over 7 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and black. Their eyes glowed like hot coals, and their muscles looked like they were carved from stone. For 10,000 years, they had conquered worlds and defeated enemies across the galaxy. They believed in one simple truth: strength was everything. And they believed humans had none. Connor worked in the medical bay on the station's middle deck. It was quiet work most days. He treated minor injuries, ran health checks, and helped aliens understand human medicine. Most species respected him for his skill, even if they didn't understand humans very well. But the Draketh were different. Vexra Catherine was the security commander for the Draketh forces on the station. She was tall, even by her species standards, with scales that shimmered like dark jewels and eyes that burned with constant anger. She had killed more enemies than she could count and wore the scars of 100 battles on her arms like medals. She hated humans, not quietly, not privately. She hated them openly, loudly, and at every opportunity. When humans walked past her in the corridors, she would spit insults in her native tongue. When human officers spoke in meetings, she would laugh at their words. She called them soft creatures and prey animals who had no place among the stars. Connor had heard all of this. He had seen the way she looked at his people, like they were insects crawling on her boot. But he never responded. He simply did his job and minded his own business. That changed on a Tuesday afternoon. Connor was carrying medical supplies from the cargo bay back to his station. The corridor was narrow in that section, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other. He turned a corner and found Vexra standing directly in his path. She did not move. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and her glowing eyes fixed on him like a predator watching its next meal. "Human?" she said. Her voice was deep and sharp, like stones grinding together. "You will yield." Connor stopped walking. He looked at her calmly. "Excuse me?" When a lesser species meets a Draketh warrior, they must yield. They must kneel and lower their eyes. She took a step closer. "This is the law of strength. You will kneel." The corridor was empty. No one else was around to see what was happening. Connor could feel the heat coming off her body, smell the strange metallic scent of her species. He knew what she wanted. She wanted him to submit. She wanted him to prove that humans were exactly what she believed them to be. "I'm not going to kneel," Connor said. His voice was steady, quiet, almost gentle. "But I'd be happy to walk around you if you prefer not to move." Vexra's eyes widened. For a moment, she seemed unable to believe what she had heard. Then her face twisted with rage. "You dare refuse me?" she hissed. "You think you have the right to stand before a warrior of the Draketh Empire?" "I think I have the right to stand," Connor replied. "That's all." She moved faster than he could react. Her hand swung through the air and struck him across the face with tremendous force. Connor's head snapped to the side, and he felt his lips split open. Blood filled his mouth, warm and metallic. The supplies he was carrying scattered across the floor. Connor stood very still for a long moment. His ears were ringing from the impact. He could feel blood dripping down his chin. Slowly, he raised his hand and wiped it away. Then he looked at Vexra again. He did not raise his fists. He did not shout or threaten or cower. He simply looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn before she struck him. "Excuse me," he said quietly. And he bent down, gathered his supplies, and walked around her. Vexera stood frozen in place. Her hand was still raised from the blow, and her mouth hung slightly open. She had expected many things. She had expected him to fight back, and she would have crushed him. She had expected him to run, and she would have laughed. She had expected him to beg, and she would have felt the satisfaction of her dominance. But this she had never expected. He had simply walked away. No anger, no fear, no submission. Just a quiet refusal to play her game. "Human," she roared after him. "This is not over. You will learn your place." Connor did not turn around. He did not respond. He just kept walking until he disappeared around the corner. Lieutenant Amy Flores found him in the medical bay 20 minutes later, treating his own split lip in front of a mirror. She was a slim woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, and she had been Connor's friend since they both arrived on the station. "I heard what happened," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "The whole station is talking about it." "People talk too much," Connor replied. "She could have killed you. Draketh warriors have murdered people for less." Connor pressed a small bandage against his lip and turned to face her. But she didn't. Amy shook her head slowly. "Why didn't you just kneel?" "It's not worth dying over pride." Connor thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "It wasn't about pride. If I kneel because she's stronger than me, then strength is the only thing that matters. And if strength is the only thing that matters, then we've already lost everything that makes us human." Amy didn't have an answer for that. Later that night, in the Draketh quarters, Vexera sat alone in her chamber. Her hands were clenched into fists, and her mind kept returning to the same image, the human's face, calm and unbothered, looking at her like she was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. No one had ever looked at her that way. "I will break him," she whispered to the darkness. "I will prove what humans truly are." But deep in some corner of her mind, a small voice asked a question she could not answer. What if she was wrong about them? She crushed that voice immediately. There was no room for doubt in a warrior's heart. The days that followed were not easy for Connor Blake. Vexera Catherine had made him her personal project. She appeared wherever he went, always watching, always waiting for an opportunity to prove her point. In the mess hall, she would knock his food tray from his hands and call him a clumsy animal. In the corridors, she would shoulder past him hard enough to send him stumbling into walls. In meetings between species, she would interrupt any human who spoke and demand to know why anyone was wasting time listening to prey. The other aliens on the station watched with great interest. Some felt sorry for the human medic who had somehow attracted the attention of a Draketh warrior. Others placed bets on how long it would take before he broke down and either fought back or begged for mercy. But Connor did neither. Every insult, every shove, every act of cruelty was met with the same quiet patience. He would pick up his scattered food without complaint. He would steady himself against the wall and keep walking. He would wait for Vexera to finish her interruptions and then continue his work as if nothing had happened. This made Vexera angrier than anything else could have. "Why won't you break?" she demanded one morning, blocking his path to the medical bay. "Why won't you fight me? Are all humans this pathetic?" Connor looked at her with those calm brown eyes that she was starting to hate. "I don't think fighting you would accomplish anything useful," he said. "And I have patience waiting." He stepped around her once again, and she let him go, her fist shaking with frustration. Amy found Connor during his lunch break, sitting alone in a quiet corner of the observation deck. Through the massive windows, stars drifted slowly past like scattered diamonds on black velvet. "You can't keep doing this," Amy said, sitting down across from him. She's getting worse. Yesterday, she told Commander Zorath that humans should be banned from the station entirely. And what did Zorath say? He said the treaty prevents that. But he didn't exactly disagree with her feelings. Amy leaned forward, her voice dropping low. Connor, she's not going to stop. Droids don't give up. It's not in their nature. Should keep pushing until something breaks. Connor was quiet for a moment, watching the stars drift by. Then he said, then she'll be waiting a long time. Amy sighed and shook her head. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. Thank you, Connor replied. And there was just a hint of a smile on his face. 3 days later, there was a joint training exercise in the station's combat simulation hall. Representatives from all species on the station were required to participate. It was meant to build cooperation and understanding between different cultures. It didn't work out that way. During a close-quarters combat demonstration, Vexera accidentally drew her ceremonial blade across Connor's forearm. The cut was deep enough to draw blood, shallow enough to avoid serious damage. The perfect insult wrapped in the disguise of a training mistake. The other participants gasped. A Velcor diplomat rushed forward to help, but Connor waved him off. It's fine, Connor said calmly. Just a scratch. He walked to the side of the training floor, opened his personal medical kit, and began treating his own wound. He cleaned the cut, applied a sealing agent, and wrapped it with a bandage. His hands were steady throughout, never trembling, never hesitating. Vexera watched him with narrowed eyes. She had hoped to see fear. She had hoped to see anger. Instead, she saw something that confused her deeply. Focus. Pure, calm focus on the task at hand. As if she didn't exist at all. The human is either very brave or very stupid, a Kethmari observer whispered to his companion. Perhaps both, the companion replied. After the exercise, Connor returned to the medical bay and continued his work as if nothing unusual had happened. He treated a Velcor engineer with a sprained tentacle, helped a human technician with a migraine, and updated patient records until his shift ended. Amy visited him that evening with a bottle of something she claimed was similar to whiskey. You should report her, Amy said, pouring 2 glasses. What she did today crossed a line. It wouldn't change anything, Connor replied. Draketh warriors are protected by their own laws. Commander Zorath would just say it was an accident during training. So what? You're just going to let her keep hurting you? Connor took a sip from his glass and thought about the question. She's not really hurting me, he said finally. She's hurting herself. Every time she attacks me and I don't react, it proves that her whole philosophy is wrong. Strength isn't just about muscles and blades. It's about who you are when things get hard. Amy stared at him for a long moment. You're actually trying to teach her something, aren't you? Connor shrugged. I'm just being myself. If she learns something from it, that's up to her. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A Draketh transport ship arrived at the station, bringing supplies and personnel transfers. Among the new arrivals was a young Draketh male, smaller than most of his kind, with scales that hadn't yet darkened to their adult colors. His name was Torek, and he was Vexera's younger brother. Connor learned this by accident. He was passing through the docking bay when the transport opened, and he saw Vexera waiting at the bottom of the ramp. Her usual expression of cold anger was gone. In its place was something he had never expected to see on her face. Warmth. She embraced Torek tightly, speaking rapidly in her native language. The young Draketh laughed and returned the embrace, clearly happy to see his sister. Connor stopped and watched for just a moment. It was strange to see Vexera acting like a normal person with someone she loved. It reminded him that even the cruelest people had something soft hidden inside them. Torek noticed Connor watching and tilted his head curiously. Who is that? He asked his sister. Vexera's warmth disappeared instantly. Her face hardened back into its familiar mask of contempt. "No one important," she said coldly. "Just a human." But Torak continued to look at Connor with curious eyes, and Connor nodded politely before walking away. That night, Torak was assigned to the lower decks for his orientation training. The lower decks housed environmental systems, backup generators, and research laboratories. It was considered the safest part of the station. It was also where the pathogen containment facility was located. At 3 in the morning. Alarms began to scream throughout Harmony Point. Red lights flashed in every corridor, and emergency announcements blared from every speaker. Containment breach in Laboratory 7. Biological hazard detected. All personnel evacuate lower deck immediately. Repeat. All personnel evacuate lower deck immediately. Connor was already running toward the medical bay when his communicator buzzed with incoming reports. The pathogen that had escaped was called Strain Epsilon. It was extremely lethal to several species on the station, including the Dracoth, and Torak had been in Laboratory 7 when the breach occurred. The command center was chaos. Officers from every species were shouting orders, checking monitors, and trying to understand what had happened. Commander Zorath stood at the center of it all, his massive form rigid with tension as reports flooded in from every direction. Strain Epsilon was a laboratory specimen that had been contained for study. It was a bacterial pathogen that attacked the nervous system of certain species, causing rapid paralysis and death within hours. Humans were resistant to it. Velcor were immune entirely. But for the Dracoth, it was almost always fatal, and Torak was trapped in the contaminated zone. Connor arrived at the command center, just as Vexera burst through the doors. He had never seen her like this before. Her usual cold anger was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. Her eyes were wild, and her voice cracked as she spoke. "Where is my brother?" she demanded, grabbing a technician by the shoulders. "Tell me where he is." "Section 7 is completely contaminated," the technician stammered. "We've sealed the area according to protocol. No one can go in or out." "I don't care about protocol. Torak is in there." Commander Zorath stepped forward and placed a heavy hand on Vexera's shoulder. "Warrior," he said, his voice deep and solemn. "You know what must be done." Vexera spun to face him. "No, you can't mean that. The Dracoth protocol for containment breaches is clear. The infected section must be vented to space. It is the only way to ensure the pathogen does not spread to the rest of the station." Zorath's face showed no emotion. "Your brother knew the risks when he entered that section. He's just a trainee. He was only there for orientation. That does not change the protocol." Connor watched this exchange from across the room. He could see Vexera's hands trembling, could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. She was a warrior who had faced death countless times without flinching, but this was different. This was her little brother. "Please," Vexera said, and her voice broke on the word. "He is all I have left. Our parents died in the border wars. He is my only family." Zorath closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was something like regret in his expression. "I am sorry, Catherine, but honor demands sacrifice. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. The venting will proceed in 30 minutes. Vexera staggered backward as if she had been struck. Her legs seemed to give out, and she caught herself against the console. For the first time since Connor had known her, she looked broken. No one spoke. No one moved to comfort her. In Dracoth culture, grief was considered a private matter, and offering sympathy was seen as an insult to a warrior's strength. Connor made a decision. He walked quietly out of the command center, unnoticed in the chaos. He moved quickly through the corridors until he reached the emergency equipment storage near the medical bay. There, he pulled out a hazardous environment suit and began putting it on. Amy found him there 3 minutes later. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Going in," Connor replied, sealing the suit's gloves. "Are you insane? Strain Epsilon could kill you." "Could," Connor said, checking his helmet seal. "Not will. Humans are resistant, not immune. There's a difference. A small difference." "Connor, you're talking about walking into a death trap to save someone who belongs to the species that's been making your life hell for months." Connor paused and looked at her. "He's a kid, Amy. He's 19 years old, scared, and dying alone in a dark room while his sister listens to people tell her that the rules say he has to die." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't become a medic to let kids die when I can do something about it. But after everything Vexera did to you..." "This isn't about Vexera." Connor picked up his medical kit and slung it over his shoulder. "This is about who I am." He walked past her toward the sealed doors that led to the lower deck. Amy didn't try to stop him. The contaminated section was dark and filled with a thin mist that hung in the air like a ghost. Emergency lights flickered red every few seconds, casting strange shadows on the walls. Connor moved carefully through the corridors, checking his suit's sensors for any signs of breach. He found Torak in Laboratory 7, collapsed against a wall near the back of the room. The young Draketh was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. His scales had turned a sickly gray color, and his eyes struggled to focus. "Human?" Torak whispered weakly. "Why are you here?" "I'm a medic," Connor said, kneeling beside him and opening his kit. "I'm here to help. But my sister, she hates humans." "I know." Connor began examining Torak's vital signs with a portable scanner. "But that doesn't mean I hate her. And it definitely doesn't mean I'm going to let you die." The scanner's readings were bad. The pathogen had already spread through most of Torak's system. Standard Draketh treatments would be useless at this stage. But Connor had an idea. During his time on the station, he had studied the biology of every species he might need to treat. He knew that strain Epsilon attacked certain protein structures that were common in Draketh nervous tissue. But humans had different protein structures, which was why they were resistant. If he could introduce human antibodies into Torak's system, there was a small chance, a very small chance, that they might help fight the infection. It was risky. It had never been tried before, but it was the only option. "This might hurt," Connor said, preparing an injection from his own blood supply. "And I won't lie to you, it might not work." Torak looked at him with those young, frightened eyes. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Connor smiled behind his helmet. "You don't have to know someone to help them. That's kind of the whole point." He administered the injection. In the command center, Vexera stared at the monitors showing the contaminated section. She had seen Connor enter. She had watched him move through the dark corridors toward her brother. And now she watched as he knelt beside Torak and tried to save his life. "What is he doing?" she whispered. "It appears the human medic is attempting some kind of treatment," a Velcor officer reported. "Our sensors show he has injected something into the patient." "That's impossible. There is no treatment for strain Epsilon." "Nevertheless, that is what is happening." Commander Zorth stood beside Vexera, his expression unreadable. "The venting protocol will proceed as scheduled. 15 minutes remain." Vexera turned to him with fire in her eyes. "You would kill the human as well?" "He went in there to save my brother. He chose his fate when he entered the contaminated zone." Zorth's voice was cold. "We cannot risk the entire station for 2 lives." Vexera looked back at the monitor. She watched Connor working desperately over Torak's body, checking readings, adjusting treatments, refusing to give up even as the clock counted down toward death. She thought about every cruel thing she had done to him. Every insult, every blow, every humiliation. And now he was in there, risking his life for her brother. Something inside her cracked. "I will not let them die," she said quietly, and she began to run. Connor worked faster than he had ever worked in his life. The injection had stabilized Torak slightly, but the young Draketh was still in critical condition. His breathing was weak, and his pulse kept fluctuating in ways that made Connor's heart pound with worry. The human antibodies were fighting the pathogen, but they needed time to work. Time they didn't have. 12 minutes until venting protocol. The station's automated voice announced over the speakers. Torak's eyes fluttered open. "Human, Connor. You should go." "I'm not leaving without you," Connor replied, preparing another injection to support Torak's weakened system. "Why? You could still make it out." "Leave me here." Connor shook his head. "That's not how this works. We're both walking out of here, or neither of us is." Torak stared at him with confusion and something that might have been wonder. "My people, we don't understand humans. We thought you were weak because you don't fight like we do. But this is something else." "We have a saying on Earth," Connor said, helping Torak into a sitting position. "Strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can carry and keep moving." He pulled Torak's arm over his shoulders and lifted the young Draketh to his feet. Torak was heavy, much heavier than a human of similar size would be, but Connor had carried wounded soldiers through worse conditions than this. "Can you walk?" Connor asked. "I will try," Torak replied. Together, they began moving toward the exit, step by painful step. In the corridors outside the contaminated zone, Vexra ran faster than she had ever run before. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was racing with thoughts she didn't know how to process. All her life, she had been taught that strength meant power. It meant the ability to crush your enemies, to dominate those weaker than yourself, to never show mercy or compassion because those things were weaknesses that others would exploit. But the human had shown her something different. He had been mocked and beaten and humiliated. He had every reason to hate her and her people. And when her brother was dying, when the rules said Torak had to be sacrificed, the human had walked into the death zone without hesitation. Not for glory, not for recognition, not even for revenge, just because he could help, just because it was the right thing to do. Vexra reached the control station for the inner seal. According to protocol, the seal was supposed to remain closed until the venting was complete. Opening it early would be a violation of Draketh military law, punishable by exile or worse. She didn't care. 10 minutes until venting protocol, the automated voice announced. Vexra's hands moved over the controls. The security system demanded her authorization code, and she entered it without hesitation. Warning lights flashed, and alarms began to sound. Warning: Inner seal breach detected. This action violates containment protocol. Override, Vexra said through gritted teeth. Security Commander Kethrin authorizing emergency access. The inner seal began to open. Inside the contaminated zone, Connor saw the lights change on the door ahead. Someone was opening it from the outside, giving them a path to escape. Come on, he said to Torak. We need to move faster. They stumbled forward through the mist-filled corridors. Torak was getting heavier with each step, his strength fading as the pathogen continued its attack on his system. But Connor refused to stop. He adjusted his grip, shifted Torak's weight, and kept pushing forward. 8 minutes until venting protocol. The door was just ahead now. Connor could see the clean air of the outer corridor through the widening gap. He could see Vexra standing at the control panel, her face twisted with desperate hope. Faster, she shouted. You need to move faster. Connor's legs were burning. His arms felt like they were being torn from their sockets. But he pushed through the pain and dragged Torak the final 20 meters to the door. They crossed the threshold just as the inner seal finished opening. Close it, Connor shouted. Close the seal now. Vexera hit the controls, and the door began sliding shut behind them. Through the narrowing gap, they could see the mist of the contaminated zone swirling in the emergency lights. 6 minutes until venting protocol. The door sealed with a heavy clang. For a moment, no one moved. Connor lowered Torak to the floor as gently as he could, his whole body shaking with exhaustion. Vexera dropped to her knees beside her brother, her hands hovering over him as if afraid to touch. "Torak?" she whispered. "Torak, can you hear me?" The young Draketh's eyes opened slowly. His color was still bad, but his breathing was steadier than before. The treatment was working. "Sister," he said weakly, "I'm still here." Vexera made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She gathered her brother in her arms and held him tight, her warrior's composure completely shattered. Connor sat back against the wall and watched them. His suit's sensors showed no sign of contamination, which meant the pathogen hadn't breached his protection. He had made it. They had both made it. After a long moment, Vexera looked up at him. Her eyes were wet with tears, something Connor had never expected to see from a Draketh warrior. Her expression was complex, filled with emotions she didn't seem to know how to express. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was rough and broken. "I struck you. I humiliated you in front of the entire station. I did everything I could to make you suffer. Why would you risk your life for my blood?" Connor thought about the question. He could have said many things. He could have talked about duty or medical ethics or the importance of proving that humans were better than their reputation. But none of those answers would have been true. "He's just a kid," Connor said simply. "That's all that mattered." Vexera shook her head slowly. "I don't understand. In my culture, you answer cruelty with cruelty. You answer blood with blood. That is the warrior's way." "Maybe that's part of the problem," Connor replied gently. "If you always answer cruelty with cruelty, the cruelty never ends. Someone has to choose to break the cycle." Vexera stared at him for a long moment. Something was shifting behind her eyes, some fundamental belief being questioned for the first time in her life. "You could have let him die," she said. "You could have had your revenge on me. No one would have blamed you." Connor smiled tiredly. "I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the help." The automated voice interrupted them. "Venting protocol complete. Contaminated section has been cleared. Emergency status downgraded to yellow." Medical teams arrived moments later, rushing to treat Torak and check Connor for any signs of exposure. Commander Zorth came with them, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. He looked at Vexera kneeling on the floor with her brother in her arms. He looked at Connor sitting exhausted against the wall. And he said nothing at all. But as he turned to leave, Connor thought he saw something in the old commander's eyes. It might have been surprise, or it might have been respect. 3 days passed before Torak was well enough to leave the medical bay. The human antibodies had done their work better than anyone expected. The pathogen had been neutralized, and Torak's body was slowly recovering from the damage it had caused. The doctors, both human and alien, called it a medical miracle. Connor just called it luck and good timing. During those 3 days, word spread through Harmony Point about what had happened. The story grew with each telling, as stories often do. By the end of the first day, everyone on the station knew that a human medic had walked into a death trap to save a Draketh warrior's brother. By the end of the second day, ships passing through the sector were carrying the tale to other stations. By the end of the third day, it seemed like half the galaxy was talking about the strange human who answered hatred with heroism. Connor tried to avoid the attention. He went back to work in the medical bay, treating patients and filing reports as if nothing unusual had happened. When people asked him about his experience, he would shrug and change the subject. "I was just doing my job," he told Amy when she pressed him for details. "That's all." "You're either the most humble person I've ever met," Amy replied, "or the most stubborn. Can't I be both?" On the morning of the fourth day, Torak came to see him. The young Draketh looked much better. His scales had returned to their natural color, and his eyes were bright and alert. He stood in the doorway of the medical bay for a moment, as if uncertain whether he was welcome. "Come in," Connor said, gesturing to a chair. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Torak replied, sitting down carefully. "Much better. The doctors say I will make a full recovery." "I'm glad to hear it." Torak was quiet for a moment, his clawed hands clasped together in his lap. Then he said, "I need to ask you something, Connor Blake, and I need you to answer honestly." Connor nodded. "I'll try. My people believe that strength is everything. We believe that the strong rule and the weak serve. We believe that mercy is a sign of weakness, and that helping those who cannot help themselves is foolish." Torak looked up at Connor with genuine confusion in his young eyes. "But you are not weak. You walked into death to save a stranger. That took more courage than most Draketh warriors ever show. So why don't humans fight back when we challenge them? Why do you choose gentleness instead of strength?" Connor thought carefully about his answer. This was not a casual question. This was a young man trying to understand a way of thinking that was completely foreign to everything he had been taught. "I think you're asking the wrong question," Connor said finally. "You're assuming that gentleness and strength are opposites, that you have to choose one or the other. But that's not true." Torak tilted his head. "I don't understand. Being gentle when you could be cruel takes more strength than being cruel. Showing mercy when you could take revenge takes more strength than taking revenge." Connor leaned forward slightly. "We do fight, Torak, but we choose our battles. And the most important battles aren't fought with fists. They're fought by deciding who you want to be, and then being that person no matter what anyone else does to you." Torak considered this for a long time. Then, slowly, a small smile crossed his face. "My sister was right about one thing," he said. "Humans are strange creatures. But I think perhaps strange is not the same as weak." "Perhaps not," Connor agreed. Torak stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Thank you, Connor Blake, not just for saving my life. Thank you for showing me that there are other ways to be strong." Connor nodded. "Take care of yourself, Torak, and take care of your sister. I think she's going through some changes of her own." That evening, Connor received a message on his personal communicator. It was from Vexera, requesting a private meeting in the observation deck. He considered ignoring it for about 3 seconds before deciding to go. She was already there when he arrived, standing by the massive windows and looking out at the stars. Her reflection in the glass showed a face that was troubled and thoughtful, so different from the cold mask of anger he had known before. "You came," she said without turning around. "You asked," Connor replied. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, Vexera turned to face him. Her movements were slow and uncertain, as if she was doing something she had never done before. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words came out stiff and awkward, like they were in a language she didn't speak well. "What I did to you, the insults, the blows, the humiliation, it was wrong. I see that now." Connor waited, saying nothing. "In my culture, apologies are rare. We consider them a sign of weakness. But after what you did for Torak," Vexera shook her head slowly, "I cannot pretend anymore. I was wrong about humans. I was wrong about you. What changed your mind?" Connor asked. Vexera was quiet for a moment, searching for the right words. "When I watched you enter that contaminated section, I felt something I had never felt before. Shame. True shame. Not the shame of losing a battle, but the shame of knowing that I had treated a good person badly. She met his eyes directly. You could have let my brother die. You had every reason to want me to suffer. But you chose to save him anyway. Not because you wanted something from me. Not because you were trying to prove a point. Simply because you believed it was the right thing to do. That's true, Connor said. I have spent my whole life believing that mercy is weakness. That helping others without gaining something in return is foolish. But you showed me that I was wrong. Vexra's voice dropped to almost a whisper. You showed me that true strength is choosing kindness when revenge would be easier. I don't know what to do with that knowledge. Connor smiled gently. You don't have to do anything right away. Understanding something new takes time. Just keep thinking about it. Let it change how you see the world. Vexra nodded slowly. I will try. She paused, then added, there is something else. I have spoken with Commander Zorth. I told him what you did and what it meant. He has agreed to enter a formal commendation for you in the station's records. Your actions will be recognized by the Draketh Empire as an act of honorable courage. Connor raised his eyebrows. That's unexpected. There is more. Word of what happened has spread far beyond this station. Other species are talking about humanity differently now. They are beginning to wonder if perhaps they have misjudged your people. I didn't do it for recognition, Connor said. I know, Vexra replied. That is exactly why it matters. They stood in silence for another moment, looking out at the stars together. Then Connor turned to leave. Connor, Vexra called after him. He paused. The corridor where we first met. Where I struck you and demanded you kneel. Her voice was heavy with emotion. If we meet there again, I will step aside for you. And I will bow as a Draketh warrior bows to one who has earned her respect. Connor turned back to look at her. You don't have to do that. I know, Vexra said. But I want to. You taught me something I never expected to learn. You made me see myself clearly, and I did not like what I saw. I want to be better. I want to be more like you. Connor smiled. Just be better than you were yesterday. That's all any of us can do. He walked away through the corridors of Harmony Point, passing aliens from a dozen different species who nodded to him with new respect in their eyes. He didn't notice them. He wasn't thinking about recognition or honors or changing the galaxy's opinion of humanity. He was just thinking about getting back to work. There were always more patients to treat, more people to help. That was what mattered. And somewhere, in the dark spaces between the stars, a story was spreading. A story about a human who refused to kneel. A human who answered cruelty with patience and hatred with heroism. A human who showed the galaxy that being human meant something they were only beginning to understand. The strongest thing of all, it turned out, was simply being kind.